It's time for our Flashpoint 2 finals, and someone will be going home with our beautiful AK-47 trophy. That's nice and all, but what's nicer is the $500,000 that is on the line for our first place team here. Second place, still guaranteed $250K, so regardless, people are going home with a very healthy chunk of change. Joining me today are Thorin and Maui on Get to the Point. We're going to talk a little bit about MVP before we dig into the actual finals matchup here. And we have a lot of candidates, but what's interesting about this particular tournament is that our winners bracket team, Virtus.pro, doesn't necessarily have the strongest MVP candidates, does it, Thorin?
It's just not really been the way that they've won their matches. Like, they've won their matches off a mixture of team effort. Like, as far as I can tell, doing interesting prep. That's how they've gotten map wins that you never would have expected in the map pool. They've even been able to do stuff like, for me, Overpass is the mark here. They started out the playoffs looking terrible on it against Mad Lions. By the end of the playoffs, it was winning them series. So I think one of the things about this team is they've done it with their minds. They've done it with actual preparation. Things you'd want, by the way, younger players to look up to beyond just like, you know, you can't really show someone a simple and say, just be as good as him. You can't do it. You can actually follow the kind of path that these players have set out.
I know you're such a Yekindar enthusiast, Maui. We are going to talk about that later, but surely you don't agree that VP has a leading candidate in this MVP race.
There's definitely nobody that jumps out on the scoreboard to say or have an MVP case, despite how much of a Yekindar fan I am, and despite how exciting James can actually be at times when he's actually taking the fights. It's surprising that when you look at it, they've made it to the grand finals through the winners bracket, and no one even really has that great of a stat line. So yeah, I think I have to agree with what Thorin said. I think the prep work and the teamwork and just their ability to wear teams down is really what got them here.
And it's even more impressive when you think that their winners bracket matchups consisted of Mad Lions. They won that. Big, they won that. Fnatic, they won that. The only match they've lost in this tournament was to OG itself, and that was in our group stage final. We'll be getting into that. That's going to be a very interesting topic of discussion. But first, let's go through some of our MVP candidates here, because they're coming from a lot of teams that haven't made it to the finals, but have had outstanding individual performances so far. And first up, I don't think he's going to win, but we at least have to give some credit to KNG from MIBR. He is the last survivor of this MIBR roster that made it to the finals of Flashpoint 1, obviously losing legends like Fallen and Taco, his last teammate Fur as well, and replacing him with these newer players or players that are kind of getting a second chance at life like Lucas. So when we look at KNG, what is it about his opping and his IGLing that was so phenomenal in Flashpoint 2, Thorin?
I mean, when you talk about a player like KNG, first of all, in terms of the MVP angle, there are so many maps played in this tournament. In theory, you can absolutely win without making the final. It's just, if someone steals the show in the final, recency bias is going to make it hard for you to overcome that. So I think the crazy thing for me is KNG always had amazing fragging power. Even way back 3 years ago on Immortals, his raw fragging ability was what made him exciting. But much like actually the discussion about JW earlier, it's how he sort of tuned up the weaknesses in his game. Like, he's kept all the aggression, all the raw skill. Like, look at this, 3 of those kills were with the scout. But then he seems to have somehow just gotten smarter at playing the game. And the fact that he's apparently playing the IGL role while doing all of this, I mean, the raw impact this guy was having game to game was unbelievable. Even, quite frankly, the losing map of the tournament for them against the guys Moji, he was unbelievable. He was arguably the best player in the server. So I think right now, when you consider that, yes, the Furia guys are out there, but outside of Fury, this is the best Brazilian player right now.
Yeah, he's been absolutely phenomenal, and I want to really bridge into his IGLing because, Maui, you have really been gushing about his leading in game.
Yeah, definitely. There's so much to say about his skill, though, that I have to bring up one thing, is that when the ex-Immortals roster was actually, they had this weird stint in MDL, and I was actually playing against them for a while during that run. This guy was taking my elbow off every time before I even rounded corners. Like, he is so fast. I don't think you get how fast this guy truly is until you're facing off against him, or you just see it from the person who he's killing's perspective. Because with the op, this gun was nerfed a few years ago because it was too easy to peek around corners and just destroy people instantly. He is just instantaneous. It feels like he's so ready for every peek, but his IGLing is also phenomenal. I think that raises his case as an MVP for me, because the way that he's able to, this team is not the most experience. Like these players haven't all played at a tier 1 level, but he's making them compete with tier 1 European teams just a couple months out of the gate. This is crazy what he has done with this roster. I don't know how much of it's Kogu, I don't know how much of it's KNG, but in the mid round, they are actually money. The way they're able to work around the opponents and find holes in defenses for teams such as Astralis, Heroic, G2. I mean, that's something you just don't expect for a team this young.
And by the way, he actually has the most total opening kills of anyone in this discussion, and he stopped playing a series ago and has been watching the match with the rest of us.
Very impressive. And yeah, MIBR, certainly a team that we didn't expect to make top 4 here with this roster. When it was announced, it seems unbelievable that they could make a deep run like this in a tournament like Flashpoint. But really credit to KNG and the rest of his teammates for doing an amazing job at using their boot camp in Serbia to get themselves up to speed, developing their map pool so quickly, and exciting things for this roster, I think, in the future. Now let's move on from MIBR. Brolan, the young gun from Fnatic, he has had an outstanding tournament as well. Earlier today, he came in as the number 4 rated player in terms of HLTV rating. Is this guy living up to MVP credit, Maui?
Yeah, I would say so. If Fnatic went to the finals, I think Brolan would be the surefire case for an MVP on this roster. It feels like he's set up some of the time, but other times he's just locking his spots down. And you can see here on this entry path right here, at one point he's the first in, he kind of takes his time with it all, but he just finds so many frags because of his pure aim. I feel like in terms of raw aim, he was easily top 3 at this tournament. I think the only person who had a really strong case for beating him out would have been Xantares, but Brolan just obliterated Xantares in terms of impact, it felt like, this tournament thus far.
Yeah, and I would also say, like, the crazy thing about this guy is he is still so young in his career. It's because he's gotten, thankfully, this is another thing. When they brought him into Fnatic, they didn't expect him to have to tear the world up immediately. And those couple of years have paid enormous dividends as some of the older names have dropped off in terms of performance. And I think what I find so impressive about the way that he plays is this was the guy everyone said earlier this year, oh, he's just abusing the Krieg, like he's going to be way worse. Like, by the way, he hasn't had a Krieg at this tournament practically. Like, he's just using an AK, and that aim is so amazing. And on the CT side, by the way, spoiler, the AUG was nerfed over a year ago. You can't nerf Brolan though. Look how amazing he is when he has that AUG. So to me, he's just found his game. So right now, if you're the other Fnatic players, you just get the fuck out of his way. You do whatever else needs to be done, and you just let this guy shoot people in the head.
Yeah, well, Brolan's been a strong candidate. I know he's not your favorite candidate on Fnatic, Thorn. You wouldn't even have him as the Fnatic MVP because you've been in love with JW. And I think the consolidation final that we just saw today, where he was dropping 36 kills on that first map, getting these clutches, really keeping Fnatic in that game, is evidence enough that he should be considered for this award, right?
Yes, I mean, obviously stats alone don't tell you everything in a tournament. In fact, they should only start the conversation. But when you start the conversation by saying JW had like the best plus minus, so that means in terms of deaths and kills, the massive disparity between them, that shows you he has transformed his game from where he was 5 years ago when he was winning those majors. And in that particular matchup, like, he did more than enough to win that series. It's not on him at all. Like, this map obviously was the one that they played in the opener, not that specific one against OG, but Mirage. He basically was the best player in the server. He was fantastic. It's just that his team couldn't hold it together, and OG crept over the line. So I think if you just look at the variety in his game, how much more cerebral he's become as a player, he's actually become one of the most stable elements of his team, whereas he used to be the polar opposite. He was the wild card. He was the guy who he was there just to cause havoc to the other team, make them answer for him. And as I always say, his stats used to be invisible ones, like map pressure or uncertainty factor or just tilting the opponent by calling himself J Wonderchild and just hop around the corner and shoot people in the head with a CZ. Now he's just actually outskilling people. Like, he's actually completed his game half a decade later.
Where are you at now? Are you with JW or with Brolan as the preferred MVP of Fnatic?
I've got to go with JW. I feel like it's just such a shocker. Having watched Fnatic throughout this whole year, at the very beginning of the online era, they had one tournament victory, but after that, they were pretty much silent across the board. A lot of low place finishes, 8th place, 6th place. It wasn't looking great for Fnatic, but coming into Flashpoint 2 here, JW has looked like an absolute stud, and I think the reason that this team was one of the best on T-side prior to today, where they did kind of collapse on Overpass, they were one of the best T-side rated T-side teams at the entire tournament. And a lot of that was because JW was finding opening kill after opening kill. And that's something that I don't really see many other oppers doing in general anymore. It feels like a lot of times teams will center their aggressive plays around their riflers on the T side, just get that one bullet AK headshot. But JW was just man-moding it in certain positions, especially on Overpass, where I noticed that he was just getting a lot of freedom on that map and finding so many important picks. And that's when it becomes easy for Golden. That's when it's easy when you have a 5v4 on really every map. If you're able to get consistent entry frags on the T side, you are probably going to be converting a lot of that because it puts so much pressure on the CTs. And I think it's a reason why Fnatic went as deep as they did in this tournament. Brolin, he got a lot of great kills. I mean, like, yeah, he's fragging out his spots, but JW was getting mega impactful ones.
Yeah, JW sounds like the de facto here Fnatic MVP player after that judgment rendered by you guys. We're going to move on now to talk about your son, your young gentleman's son from Latvia, Maui Snake, and that is Yekindar. Now tell me, why is Yekindar good enough to be adopted into the House of Maui?
Yekindar is just such a raw talent, and that's what I really love about him. I feel like this guy has taken a lot of the lessons that he had while growing up in some of the tier 2 competition and has just tried to make them work against top tier competition. But that being said, he has been punished a little bit more, but you still see flashes of greatness in his play. You still see the mechanical ability, how he's able to find multi-frags in situations that no one else ever has any business finding those multi-frags, because two things. One, his crosshair placement is just so great when rounds get hectic, which is something that is very difficult. It's not like he always has the craziest, snappiest aim. He somehow plays such an aggressive style, but always feels in control of the situation when you actually watch his perspective. And two, it's actually just, he takes an FPL style and brings it to the game, so it gets the team. I think the main thing we heard when listening to the comms of other teams when they're playing against Fnatic is what the fuck is going on? Why are they doing this? Because Yekindar would just come out of nowhere, just take your head off, the head off of two players, and he always felt like he was exploiting the gaps in the opposing teams.
Now, I know that Maui's very proud of his adoptive son, Thorin, but I'm going to need you to go ahead and smash his dreams. Tell him why Yekindar is not going to be the MVP of this tournament. He's 23rd in HLTV rating. He's had some ups and downs. And if he were to be MVP, what kind of finals performance would Yekindar have to make him number one for you?
He would have to have an absolutely absurd one. We're talking like he'd have to drop like simple zero type numbers, because the problem is stats wise, and let's face it, almost all MVP awards begin with a stats conversation. He just isn't there on the numbers. Like, he's there for the opening kills. So in terms of like entry impact, I can give him that. In terms of eye test, the aim looks phenomenal. Like, he has probably some of the best highlights in the whole tournament. The issue is, for me, he's a player who's still developing. So in a year from now, we could probably have this discussion and the stats might even be there. But I think you saw in some of the playoff series, he wasn't even the main reason his team always got through the game. It was actually other players, like Buster was kind of Mr. Reliable. He was sort of playing the Crims role on that team. Jim would have maps where he'd come alive. And one of the issues I had was, as they went around the map pool, because Yekindar is a newer player, certain maps, sometimes on Overpass, I thought a couple of times on Vertigo, he had his drop-offs. He had his moments where he didn't look like he was in tune with what they wanted to do. And so the downside of that sort of player is you can't only credit when they get the amazing entries and take over the game with aim, because also, if they could then do a lot of the other basics, they would have the stats. They'd be up there in terms of the numbers. So he gets his credit because he's in the final. Like, he has a chance. Maybe if he has some super insane performance where he 1v9s it, maybe he can get back on the radar. But it's more, I think, just giving him credit for his tournament and where the team is in general that we're mentioning him in the conversation now.
All right. Let's move on to our MVP favorite. The presumptive MVP of Flashpoint 2 has got to be Valde from OG. And we say this even if OG go on to lose this next series, because there isn't a clear candidate, whether it's Yekindar or Jame from Virtus.pro. So what has Valde done, Thorin, that's been so remarkable that puts him in this situation where somebody would absolutely have to pop the fuck off in order to overtake him, even in a loss?
Well, one of the reasons I always used to criticise people overrating Forest was he used to have basically everyone's favourite fragger positions and some of the best CT positions to create highlights from. Whereas Valde is someone where he's rotating back into a site because he anchors a whole bunch of sites. He plays all the spots where if I'm on a contract year in a team, I don't want to be playing these spots. I'm not going to get my numbers. So the idea that he is just smashing so many categories, he has the highest rating, he has the most total kills, he has, like, out of our group, the second highest kill death differential. He has plus 97 for the tournament. He has enormous amount of opening kills. He has the most success in opening kill percentage. He has the highest KAST in terms of kills, assists, survival, time, or whatever it is. He has the most clutches one. Like, the guy basically has done everything. And again, to reiterate one more time, he is not given all the resources, and he is not the guy who's supposed to carry the game. So when you consider Mantu on his team, who is given a lot of resources and attention, was doing very well in the stats for quite a lot of the tournament, the idea he is outshining him, for me, that's like you're like almost 1.5 times an MVP. It's unbelievable the production he's putting up. Look at the ADR of 21 maps he has played, and he's played some of the best teams in the tournament.
Yeah, absolutely. And Maui, are you going to buttress Thorin's opinion here? Are you going to give some more Valde validation to this MVP cause?
Yeah, I have to. I feel like Valde has just been locking it down. This guy is a rock for the OG side. And when, like Thorin said, when you look at the actual positions he plays, there's no reason he should have the stats that he has. He plays long A on Dust 2. He's the B anchor on Inferno. He plays ramp on Nuke. He plays B on Train. These are spots where if you die, you pretty much just lose the round for your team instantly. But he goes above and beyond. He not only finds kills, he stays alive, he provides info to his team, and he makes proactive plays when his team needs to. He pushes at these spots, even though it is so risky to die in these certain circumstances. He finds the perfect timings. He waits long enough. He knows when it's actually going to be the most impactful so that he can get that perfect flank when they need it the most, so he can clutch out that round. He catches the opponents off guard in ways that it's crazy, because his mechanical ability along with his thought process is at such a high level right now that there's almost no world where he doesn't just end up winning MVP, even if OG do come in second place at this tournament for me.
That is quite the example that he has set here at Flashpoint 2. We will find out if Valde can perform well enough in these finals to continue Bubsky's reign as the Flashpoint MVP. We're going to dive into our pre-show for our finals match in just a few minutes, guys. But first up, a break.